Barb Bloetscher has been the state entomologist and apiarist at the Ohio Department of Agriculture since 2009, after 23 years at Ohio State University Extension. As state apiarist, she oversees the apiary program and addresses questions and issues related to the inspection program, honeybees, and other pollinators. She also identifies insects and other arthropods submitted from Ohio nursery inspectors and businesses. Barb has kept her own colonies of honeybees for over 35 years and belongs to several beekeeping clubs, as well as the Ohio Lepidopterist and other insect-related organizations.
Hi, I'm Barb Bloetscher. I'm the state apiarist and state entomologist for Ohio Department of Agriculture. I can oversee the apiary program, and I've been asked to talk about the Queen certification program that we have. So first of all, the reason that we have an apiary program is to promote the apiary business. We want to promote Ohio beekeeping. Obviously, the more healthy colonies we have, the better the yield of the crops, as well as having, birds and wildlife that receive the benefits from good pollination as well. I have the links to the laws and rules below if you want to read about it. But mainly, all these laws are set up to promote beekeeping and to protect the beekeeper. So today, I want to talk about why we have this certification program. Go through the laws a little bit, and then the definition of a nuke, the process we go through for certification, and then a little bit about the queen quality and what, whether you're the queen breeder or the buyer, what to look for and what to have. And then I'll finish up with some pest and disease problems and summarize. So we want to encourage good beekeeping in Ohio. If we could rely only on Ohio queens and nukes, we would be so far ahead. We'd have healthy bees, probably not have as many viruses as we have, because we're constantly bringing bees up and moving bees around. But that, that's not it's pie in the sky. That's not going to happen. So we do want to encourage all of our beekeepers to buy local bees, buy Ohio bees as much as possible. And this is just pictures showing a healthy brood. This is all capped brood. That's what you want to see in your colonies. Below, I have pictures of queen cells. And again, the bigger the cell, the better, hopefully, that queen is going to be. So this is an Ohio law that was set up back in the 1920s. And it reads that all beekeepers who sell nukes or queens or packages from their own bees, they have to have those apiaries inspected. And it's not just one apiary, by the house or whatever. It's all the apiaries from which frames or bees are used to produce that queen or that nuke. So all those apiaries should be inspected. Because of COVID, we had problems, got a little bit behind last year. We extended this program so that if any apiaries that were inspected this year, assuming they received good remarks or good grades good results, those apiaries are approved and certified for the following year. So you don't need to worry about your apiary expiring in the end of May. It's going to continue for that year. So each year, as long as we inspect your apiaries, it's going to be good for the entire next year and then expire the next spring. So that we didn't want to delay anybody or prevent people from selling queens because we have such a huge demand. We have over 683 demands for queen certificates this year. So getting better and better all the time. So our inspectors, they're paid by the county, appointed and paid by the county. Our season is April 1st to the end of October. The inspectors and I inspect from sunrise to sunset on warm days, hopefully when it's above 60 degrees, when it's favorable to open the hive. The bees are all stuck at home. They're not sticking out. They're sticking outside. We're less likely to open the hive unless the beekeeper requests it or extenuating circumstances. Find out who your bee inspector is. you can go to our website, and I have a link up ahead. You can call our office, find out who your inspector is, and get to know him or her. We have excellent inspectors, and they are doing their best to get all these inspections done. We know with COVID still going on. If you can't get hold of your inspector, again, please call the office. If necessary, I can come out and inspect the apiaries myself. So, please don't feel frustrated if you can't get hold of the inspector if they don't make it out. Remember again that these inspectors are usually on a time budget and a monetary budget, so they can't make excess trips. So usually once they go out to a particular township, they're going to do all apiaries in that township, then they'll go to the next one and the next one. So they're not going back and forth and wasting a lot of gas. If you are going to be selling queens or nukes, please mark that on your registration form. Make sure to get that sent in on time, if at all possible, and write on there which yards you're going to be using to make queens. And then we'll make sure to inspect those particular yards. So our goal when we're doing queen inspections, or any inspection as far as that goes, is to look for pest and disease. We're going to make a note of the general health of the colony. Is it vigorous? Is there a good queen pattern, a good egg laying pattern? Is there, are there all stages of brood, and does it look healthy? That's what we look for. We may or may not check the bottom box because a lot of times if there is evidence of American fibroid, the bees go up and they abandon that bottom box. And that's usually where the American fibroid is. So we may check the bottom boxes sometimes, especially with newer beekeepers. They're just getting started. We may or may not, but we try to go through all the boxes quickly just to make sure there's healthy brood, and then we move on to the next hive. If there's a yard that has 20 or more colonies, we usually inspect a percentage of it. Sometimes we go ahead and do them all, just to be on the safe side. It's interesting that usually it's the healthy colonies where we find American fibroid, because the bees have just kind of walled it off with propolis and moved on. Weaker colonies, it's pretty obvious quickly if the bees are sick, we're going to check those too. So we check strong colonies as well as weak colonies. And then based on what we see, we may or may not take samples to send to Beltsville. We'll make comments on that inspection form, and then we'll leave a copy with the beekeeper, and then send the other forms to the office. So please make sure that you register your apiaries by June 1st. These are all printed and given to the inspectors usually by the end of April. So you want to make sure that you get your stuff in as soon as possible. A lot of times beekeepers don't really know what they're doing until later, but we want to at least get the process started. So mark on your form which yards you want to have inspected for your queen certificate. Make sure that you give us a good phone number and email. That's so important so that we can get hold of you. If you have questions, please call our office, and we'll do our best to help you any way we can. And then once you get your certificate, post it somewhere. Be proud of that, because you deserved it. So this is a copy of or an example of the inspection form. So we have a check mark up here showing that the person needs a queen certificate. We're going to mark, how many colonies they have. This person has 29 colonies. If we find mites in all or some of the colonies, we're going to mark that they have, 28 live colonies. You typically, if there's mites in a few hives, there's usually mites in all the hives. So we typically, the number of varroa mites is going to match the number of colonies. So there's one dead hive, 29 total hives, so there's 28 live hives. So don't be alarmed when you see the number of varroa mites being high. This is the number of colonies that have mites. And for the most part, most colonies anywhere in the world are going to have varroa mites. It's pretty hard to avoid. We'll check down here that you need a queen certificate. If we take samples, we send them to Beltsville. That may take 2 or 3 weeks. So we put that form aside and wait for the inspection form to come back. For the results to come back, and then we'll go ahead and issue the certificate if everything looks good. It is important that the inspector gives these forms to us. We don't even initiate the certification process until we get these forms. And also, I guess the point I wanted to make is these people, and I made a comment, the hives are okay. You can use this form until you actually get your certificate. So if there's a delay, just make a copy of this form and post this, because this form still is going to show that this apiary is good for a certificate. This is just an example of what the queen certificate looks like. I want to talk about nucleus hives, nukes as we call them. Every year we get complaints about this. A nucleus colony, you think about what a nucleus is as far as in molecules. The nucleus hive is just a miniature hive. It should have a strong queen and all stages of her progeny. It should have eggs, it should have larvae, it should have capped brood, and it should be overflowing with bees, just overflowing. Because this colony has to take off by itself. If you buy nukes, or if you look at a nuke and it has parallel comb, it's got the plastic foundation that's all jazzed up with parallel comb, or they don't have any food in there, or there's no bees. You look in there and there's no bees, don't buy it. You want a nice strong colony. So make sure that you look at your nukes before you leave. No matter what they say, open that hive up and look at it and see what you're getting. Just more pictures. I like to try to keep you all interested. Considerations for queen breeders. And I'm sharing this with all of you so you see how difficult it is actually to produce good queens. The colonies that you're going to use. So most beekeepers are either going to raise bees for honey or for pollination or for queens and nukes. You typically don't get a lot of honey from colonies that you're using for nukes, because you're using all those bees, especially the nurse bees, to produce queens. So if you're going to be making your queens, you want at least 3 frames of nurse bees, because it's only the nurse bees that can feed and nurture the young larvae that's going to become a queen. We have problems with people that make hard splits. By that I mean they'll take 1 frame of brood, 1 frame of honey, or they'll buy a package and they'll split into 3 hives. Now, a lot of times you don't have that critical mass. You need a lot of nurse bees. You need a lot of bees to care for those larvae that are going to become the queen. So that's the most important thing, is lots and lots of nurse bees. You need to think about who's the drones. There's a lot of new research about drones, and they're finding that some of the queens are going to, or they can actually mate with their own drones. And in that case, those bees are usually removed. But find out who are your neighbors within 3 square miles. There are a lot of people that don't take care of their bees, or they're, questionable, sources of these bees. Find out, because your queen's obviously going to mate with those drones. We get reports of hot bees. This is one of the reasons for that. How are you going to treat your colonies? How are you going to treat your queens? Miticides can shut a colony down. Even oxalic acid that people use when they're using the vapor form, that burns tips of their antennas. It enters their digestive system. Honeybees are much more fragile, much more porous than a varroa mite is. So that stuff gets in them, and it especially affects the queen, because she's going to get it over and over again, versus the workers who die in 30 days. So keep that in mind. Consider what miticide you're going to be using. Keep records. Find out, keep records of where your queen came from, who the mother is, because that's important, especially for, trying to get into this and being serious about raising queens. You want to make sure that you have nice, big, fat queen cells, not these little dinky things, because a lot of times those queens just don't survive. So nice, big, fat queen cells. And you get those because you have lots and lots of nurse bees and they're being fed. So that's really important. How old is that queen that you're going to be, using to sell or used to provide more colonies? So keep that in mind. They need a lot of food. You need to feed them. They need, to be in an area that has lots of diverse habitat and flowers, so that they're bringing in all the different sources of proteins and nutrients to feed those larvae that become the queens. Going into late July, August, I would stop producing queens. There's not enough food out there, and bees, their mentality is they stop producing queens. That's the time when they start going into storing honey for the winter. So, from the end of July, or if we have a drought, you're not going to get good queens from that, because that's not what their drive is at that time. For mating nukes, you want to make sure that at least 2/3 of those frames and those mating nukes have lots of food for those bees. You want to make sure they have, good protein, plenty of honey, and lots of nurse bees. So important to start out with good quality colonies to get your nukes. You want to make sure that your frames look like this, whether it's going to be the colonies that you're selling or the colonies you're using to produce nukes, packed full of honey. I think I used this picture again. I want to move on and talk about what causes colonies to fail. Every year we see this, and I've been seeing it even this last month, dry cells. So you look in there, so the first 3 days, worker bee, the eggs hatching into larvae, they're given royal jelly. And so the young larvae that have just hatched, they're floating in royal jelly. After that, you have multiple workers all feeding these larvae. So it's not just 2 or 3 or a handful of nurse bees feeding these larvae. Every nurse bee is going to contribute a little bit to each cell to feed these larvae. So if you see larvae like there are on the left here, where the larvae are in dry cells, they've dried up. I don't know if you can tell, but there's different ages of these larvae, even a few eggs in there, no food. So those larvae, if they even survive, they're not going to develop into good, vigorous worker bees. Typically, they die like these pictures down here. They get about this big, and they just curl up and die. A lot of times this is confused as being a European fibroid, but it's not, it's just lack of food. So this happens for several reasons. You may not have enough nurse bees. Maybe they've all been, they become forager bees if there's not enough forager bees. So nurse bees are basically upgraded to become forager bees. You may be going through a dearth, or the bees can't get out for whatever reason, and they're not finding enough nectar. So if you start to see something like this, feed the bees, sugar syrup 1-to-1 to get those nurse bees to feed these larvae, because these larvae obviously aren't going to make it. Those bees don't develop. Those larvae don't develop even if they do survive to emerge as adult bees. They have hypopharyngeal glands that are used to feed the next generation of larvae. And those hypopharyngeal glands aren't well developed, so they cannot feed the next generation of larvae. So your colony, after 3 generations of this, your colony just slides into failure. So if you're having this problem, if you're a queen breeder, 1, you definitely don't want to use these to produce a queen. And 2, when you're looking at this nuke to possibly buy, if you see dry cells like that, I advise you not to get it, because that colony is in trouble for one reason or the other. And you don't want to start buying something that's in trouble. So you want to put your colonies places where there's plenty of season-long forage. It's so important. Research has shown that if bees have proper nutrition and abundant nutrition, they can fight the viruses and the mites They can overcome problems in the environment and pesticide poisoning. So they're stronger, just like us. If we eat well and have a well-balanced meal, we can fight pests and diseases better ourselves. So it's the same thing with honeybees. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about some of the diseases that we find and how that may affect the queen process, the queen rearing process. First of all, every year, as I said, we find American Fibroid. This year we found it in a couple operations, even like a new beekeeper who bought a nuke. So we have to be so careful to check these, and if we do find it, trace back and find out, where that was purchased. So that was, fortunately, that was caught and cleaned up. But for every person that finds it and identifies it and contacts their county inspector, we have others who don't know what it is, and they just leave it and the bees die, and then they put another package in there. So it's really important for all of us beekeepers to be responsible. One is to be familiar with pests and diseases, and two is to please contact your county inspector if you see a problem. We're here to help. We're not Barney Fife. We're here to help because we want you to do well and to have a good success. So please contact us and we can try to help you solve these problems. No SEMA, we have, usually that's the highest actually in the springtime, which is at the same time you're trying to raise queens. So, and for mites, I know we talk about this to death, but if the colonies are sick or weakened from mites, you're not going to get good progeny, and that colony is not going to do well. If you are trying to make splits, and this is very important, really from mid-July on, you want to make sure that you have enough bees to cover every frame, because small hive beetles are terrible. They'll get in there. They're here year-round, but when they detect colonies in distress, and they'll get in there, and if there's frames that they can, lay their eggs and reproduce, they're going to do it. So you want to make sure that you have your enough frames and enough bees, so you have bees covering every frame, but no extras. And you think about you need room for the bees to store honey, but you don't need to have so much excess room that the bees are not covering the frames. And really from July on, you remove all your frames of foundation, because bees are not going to fill out foundation at that time of year. Again, their mental process, their instinct is to store honey. So just make sure that your colonies are tight enough and strong enough that they can fight off small hive beetles. And then just issues that we'll probably always have with unwanted races of bees. And a lot of times colonies are mean. It's not because they have Africanized genes. It's just they're mean. They've been harassed. They've got skunks bothering them. But we just want to make sure that whatever our source is of where we're getting our queens, that's from a trustworthy source. So American Fibroid, and I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly, but this bacteria forms dormant spores that can last 70 or more years in the environment. If there's a colony in a tree, in a side of a building, those bees die and they leave, another colony moves in, and you can find some of these old buildings where there's comb all the way across the whole side of the wall, the whole side of the building, and they just keep moving away from those frames of American Fibroid. So it's here. Don't feel like a bad person if you find it, because it's here. And just the most responsible thing to do is to find it and burn it and destroy it. So it's just a problem. It's like fleas on your cat. Fleas are here. It's just our responsibility to identify it and get it under control as soon as possible. So please, please, please don't buy used equipment. If you're going to buy somebody else's stuff, destroy all the comb. You can use the frames and the boxes, just singe it real well, but don't ever use old comb, especially brood comb. If it's obviously just been used for honey and there's no, pupal cases or anything in it, you might be able to get away with it, but I wouldn't take a chance. Because again, once it's in your yard, it's always going to be there. It's extremely aggressive. It's very contagious. You can have a yard with 20 colonies and one is infected. By the end of the season, all but 3 are going to be dead. So it spreads extremely fast because as these colonies decline, the robber bees go in there, they pick all that stuff up, take it back to their colony, and then it affects their colony. So please keep an eye on your colonies and let us know if you see any problems. European fibroid, it doesn't have dormant spores, but it's become more difficult to control. And it's often confused with varroa mite damage or from dry cells. So European fibroid, both of them, American fibroid and European fibroid, are both caused by bacteria. And so the bacteria are fed along with the food to the larvae, and then that bacteria starts to grow inside the larva and shuts it down. So with European fibroid, it's usually more of a problem in the springtime. And again, if the colonies are not strong, or you don't have enough nurse bees, or you don't have enough nectar, that's when this really starts to kick in, because the larvae aren't growing fast enough to outgrow these bacteria. Bacteria get in there and the bee can't flush it out because it's dry. So keep those bees well fed, especially if you're making splits, so they're getting plenty of food to flush through them. So that's the main points that I wanted to make with that. And so most of us are new generation beekeepers. We probably have never seen American fibroid. It can be extremely confusing. So if you see something that doesn't look right, again, call us. Call me, call your county inspector, ask for help, because we're happy to help. We do have some diagnostic cues to help us identify this. You can buy diagnostic kits. Thanks to OSBA, the county inspectors all have one or more of these now to help us speed up this identification process. But ask for help. You can do the rope test, which is this here, which is diagnostic for American fibroid. You can send a sample to Beltsville, and you should get that back, within a couple of weeks. And then you can use these Vita test kits. So they're a little tricky. You want to make sure that the kit hasn't expired, and you want to keep it at room temperature. And you want to make sure that you get a good gooey sample to get good results. But the main point is just ask for help and let us help you, and let us, stop the spread. So for, I guess the process for diseases, for brood diseases, you see something wrong, you're not sure what it is, you can use these diagnostic kits. You can send a sample to Maryland, mainly for control for European fibroid. Feed the snot out of them, because you need to get that syrup to flow through them. You may want to requeen. I would destroy the worst frames just to get that bacterium out of the hive. For American fibroid, the researchers, the experts still recommend burning. That's the only way that you can guarantee not to have that spore in your facility. So bleaching them and dipping them in lye, none of that has been proven to be 100% effective. Treating with antibiotic, again, that doesn't kill the spore. It masks the symptoms. So then you sell that nuke to somebody else and they don't treat, poof, they're going to have an outbreak of American fibroid. So do not treat with antibiotics, because it masks symptoms, but it's still there. And please don't hope that it goes away, because it won't, and it will continue to spread. We have other brood problems. We have several viruses. We have like 13 viruses that have been found in Ohio now. Other problems such as sac brood and chalk brood, not necessarily in queen operations unless they're pretty sick, but it does show up. Yeah, a little bit on nosema. I don't want to talk about that too much, but that's typically a spring problem that disappears. I don't think we've had queen breeders have high levels of nosema in several years. So fortunately, I think that disease is kind of slowed down a little bit. This is just an example of the lab, Beltsville lab form. You can go online yourself and send samples, but you want to make sure that you get a good sample. So again, I would recommend that you work with your county inspector or, contact me. One point about that is they do not test the bees for pesticides or for viruses. So that if you have a pesticide issue, you want to contact the pesticide division at Ohio Department of Agriculture. So just some things that we see as inspectors that I want to protect beekeeper buyers from. This picture to the left, this is a guy who consistently sells queens and nukes. That may not be it may not be a disease, but if you don't want to be buying hives that have, or buying nukes that have old black crummy wax moth ridden frames in it. So look at the frames that you're getting. This picture on the right, it could be European fibroid, or it could be just lack of food, because a lot of these were dry. But check your frames, make sure that you're getting strong bees. Look around at the apiary. How many colonies do they have? How many yards do they have? If they only have 1 yard registered or inspected, you need so many bees and so many nurse bees to get strong queens. You don't want to be buying a nuke from somebody who only has 1 yard with 5 hives. You want someone who's got, the big guys will say you need 40 or 50 hives to be a queen producer or produce nukes. So, think big. We want the best, most vigorous colonies that you can buy. So find out, how many colonies do they have? How many yards? How many colonies did they have last year compared to this year? Talk to other beekeepers who have bought nukes or queens from them and ask them how they did. Ask for a copy of that inspection report or the queen certificate to make sure that you're buying something that has been inspected. So it's so important to protect yourself. For mite is still the number one pest that we have that affects queen breeders as well as the rest of us. All these viruses have been found in Ohio. Oh, actually, I need to update this because sackbrood virus is found in Ohio as well. These are all spread by Fibroid destructor, the Mite. So I just attended a talk the other day where they were saying that, I can't remember if that slide's in here or not, that the viruses are transmitted not only by the drone, but by the queen, by her ovaries themselves and the eggs, the bees as they're feeding each other. So viruses are spread in a colony so many different ways. And every time a mite feeds on a bee, they chew on it, they eat their fat bodies, they can be injecting virus into these bees. So it don't have to have 20 mites per 100 bees. You can have 5 mites per 100 bees, and those bees are loaded with virus. And usually by the end of the season, the number of viruses are higher and the level of each virus is higher. So the very time that we're trying to get strong bees for the winter, these bees are all sick and weakened from all these viruses. So Perisic mite syndrome is basically, when you think about this mite, it's chewing on the bee pupa or on the adult bee, especially the larva or the brood, the pupa. They're feeding on them, they're chewing through the exoskeleton, which opens that bee larva or pupa up for all kinds of secondary pathogens to get in there. So this hive is dark and moist, and even though bees try to keep it disease-free, there's all kinds of secondary pathogens that can creep in here. They can creep in on the bee's feet or on the mite's feet and attack these larvae and kill them. So this bottom picture, you can see that the bees have actually chewed these pupa. They're removing them, and there's various stages of dead pupa and dead larvae. So, you know, that you don't want to, I guess my point is, you don't want to wait until you see bees with deformed wings. Even this is a strong indication that you have, your colony has high level of mites. So you want to get it under control before it gets that bad. So, you know, check your bees, check them at least once a month and check your mite levels. Do a mite wash, do an alcohol wash. 100 to 300 bees is not going to affect your colonies. Queen lays 2,000 eggs a day. So, you know, check your colonies. If you have 20 hives in the yard, don't check 2 of them. You know, check at least half of them. Because I typically find, you know, I have 1 or 2 colonies that are just overflowing, have huge levels of mites, and the other colonies don't. So as those 2 strong colonies full of mites starts to decline, the other bees are going to rob that and take those mites back with them. So, and keep in mind now that also that as the honeybee population is declining, you know, toward fall, the mite population is actually increasing. So you end up having more mites per bee just because the bees are declining and the mites are still reproducing and getting higher and higher. So the very time that we think, okay, we treat our bees and we're done for the year, you got to keep watching it and you got to keep treating if you need to treat. And don't wait until October to treat your bees, because those winter bees have already been infected. They've already had viruses and they probably are not going to live, you know, throughout the winter. So go to the Honeybee Health Coalition website. They have multiple ways of managing mites. They have videos to show you how to do it. There's information on the OSBA website as well. But have a plan and stick to it and try to keep your bees healthy before they get sick. Just to wind up here, this is the link, our website link. You can go on here, get a lot of information. I have a direct link to the tools for Aurora mite and other websites that are of interest, as well as you can click on inspection and get the information for your county inspector. So just to wind up here, before you buy that nuke or that queen, ask, you know, where's your queen certificate? Has this yard been inspected? How many of your yards have been inspected? How long have you kept bees? How many colonies or apiaries do you have? And how many did you have last year? What's the history of that queen? Are you recording to find out where she, you know, where she came from? And what are the drones like in that area? How are they going to affect the queen's progeny? Where did you get the queen? Did you buy it? Did it come from down south or out west? Is it a swarm? I'm sorry, but if you catch a colony, if you catch a swarm and put it in a box, that's not a nuke. It's a swarm in a box. So don't pay high prices for a swarm in a box because you have no idea what that health is. It's an old queen to begin with. So just ask, find out what you're getting. How long has that colony been in a box? Is it ready to explode and swarm? You can buy a really nice looking nuke and it'll be up in the trees in a week. How did you treat for mites and what is your mite control program? Ask about that. And look at the hives themselves in the yard. Do they look healthy? Do you see bees crawling around in front of the hive with deformed wings? Look at your own nuke that you want to buy and make sure it's good, strong nuke. So all these questions you want to be asking yourself. If you're the queen breeder, you want to make sure that you can answer these questions with pride, because most of you are fantastic queen breeders. And please, you know, follow the directions of these products that you use. I could go off on a lot of angles, but I'm going to stick to it. Just, you know, please, you know, follow label directions and use products that are labeled in the United States. Just for information for you, go to the Be Informed website. They have a lot of information. You can go there and find out what other beekeepers use and what works and what doesn't, what the USDA reports are on there. So a lot of really good information. And this is my phone number and email. some other links. I think that's my second to my last slide. Just more links of good information. And I'll stop right there.